Drink with Trey here. I'm here with my friend Benson Varghese with Varghese Somerset to talk to you a little bit about DWIs and what you should and shouldn't do.
Trey, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, but I really appreciate it. It's a common problem nowadays. People, and it's out in the public. It's everybody that goes out now, whether they're going out for dinner, to drink wine, to go to a friend's house, or anything. DWI is a constant problem. So I've had this constant people asking me for the last 2 or 3 years since I started the Drink with Trey, what you should and shouldn't do. And so I thought we'd have a little session here with you, being
Absolutely.
the professional,
Let's
and
do it.
answer the questions.
Absolutely.
So what do you think?
Let's do it, Trey. We've tried a lot of DWI cases, and I bet I could point you in the right direction.
Perfect. All right. So let's start with the when people get stopped. When people get stopped, should they or should not they do the field sobriety test?
When a person's stopped for a DWI, an officer is going to first come up to them and say, where are you coming from? A bar, somewhere that they serve alcohol. The officer's going to note that there's probably a smell of alcohol coming from your breath or your person. And the next thing you know, they're going to have you out of the car and they're going to ask you to do field sobriety tests. It's important to remember you are not obligated to do those tests. They are voluntary. It may not seem voluntary when you're getting stopped.
Right.
Because the officer's not saying, do you want to do them? He's saying, step out of the car. I'd like for you to perform field sobriety tests. Go ahead and get in the starting position. You'll probably need to speak up and say, hey, I have a friend who's a lawyer, or I've heard that I shouldn't do these tests, and politely decline doing the field sobriety tests. I've given these tests to a lot of people who are sober for demonstrative purposes, and most people who are sober fail these tests, at least in my experience.
Right.
So it is against my advice to do those field sobriety tests because the officer is going to put time you were stopped, where you were coming from, maybe an admission of drinking alcohol, a smell of alcohol together with your performance on field sobriety tests, and really the next thing you know, you'll be arrested.
Right. And it's a huge thing that people, they don't realize that variations of concrete change, the textures change, what they're wearing, boots, high heels, shoes, or they pull into a parking lot, anything can actually affect that field sobriety test, so they should just not do it at all.
So even though these are called standardized field sobriety tests, it's true. There's never going to be a constant, formal, regular place that the officers can take you out to do these tests. They're not going to be under ideal circumstances or situations. You might pull over on the side of the highway. You may pull over into a parking lot. There might be grass, there might be gravel. There could be a lot of different things that could affect how you stand, much less walk on that surface.
Okay, there's 3 tests you can do for field sobriety, and one of them is the eye.
The first test is typically the horizontal gaze nystagmus, or the eye test, where they're moving a stimulus in front of your face and tracking the movement of your eyes. They'll then go to the walk and turn test.
Okay.
Everyone's familiar with that. We've all seen it on TV.
Yeah. And
then the one-leg stand test. So those are the 3 standard field sobriety tests.
And I think all those tests are really prevalent now in society because you see them on social media and TV all the time.
I think people know what to expect.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So you refuse those, then they can get a warrant for blood. Correct.
Exactly. So whether you do those tests or not, the officer has the ability to first ask you for breath or blood, and if you were to follow my advice, you would say, I politely decline to give breath or blood. I'm not going to voluntarily give it.
Keyword politely.
Absolutely. And then the officer can go get a warrant for your blood. Okay. So he'd fill out an affidavit saying, these are the reasons I believe this person's intoxicated. Take it to a magistrate, and the magistrate would either say, yes, there's probable cause, or perhaps no, you can't take his blood. But typically they're going to get that warrant, and then they're going to take you to a hospital or another sanitary place where they can draw your blood.
So no refusal weekends. Are they refused or not refused? Can you actually refuse on a non-refusal weekend?
Great question.
Okay.
So the law doesn't change for no refusal weekends. It's the same 365 days a year. What's different about the no refusal weekends is they're using state and federal resources to bring the key players together to make this process a lot more efficient. So they're using money to make sure there's a magistrate judge on call and available. They're going to bring in a nurse or another qualified person who can draw the blood. so that when a person refuses to give breath or blood, they're going to get the blood much more quickly because the magistrate and the nurse are right there to go through those steps to get blood. On a typical day, that process might take hours. During no refusal weekend, that process might happen in 30 minutes. So they're going to get what they want a lot quicker. You can, and you should, still refuse even on a no refusal weekend.
Okay, so no refusal is basically for them, not for you, because you can still refuse. They're going to get it, but you still can refuse.
You can still refuse. The reason no refusal weekends exist is we know, just looking at statistics, there are a lot more DWIs and intoxication-related offenses on holiday weekends. Okay. So this is really a public awareness campaign.
And it's also safety for people who are not, it's also safety for people drinking, people not drinking. It's a good policy to have.
It is.
Okay, so if you do get taken down, or you are asked to take a breathalyzer test, should you take the breathalyzer test, yes or no?
No.
No?
You should refuse to give breath. Okay, so when an officer arrests you for a DWI, he has to give you a statutory warning where he is asking you either for breath or blood. It's the officer's choice. It's going to be based on perhaps what the officer has available or is willing to do, because for blood he's presumably going to go to a hospital or some other location. But he's going to give you this warning, and it says, hey, I'm asking you for breath or blood. If you refuse to give a sample of your breath or blood, your refusal is going to result in your driver's license being suspended for 6 months. If you give a sample and your sample shows you're above a .08, your license is only suspended for 3 months. Okay, so you're going to be faced with this dilemma of, do I give a sample, do I not? Do I think I'm at a .08 or greater? Do I want to lose my license, and if so, for how long? And you're, being given this question at perhaps 2 or 3 in the morning.
Right.
But the answer should always be, no, I am not going to voluntarily give breath or blood. And there's an important reason for this, and it's not that the officer won't go get a warrant for breath or blood. If you consent, there's very little a defense attorney can do to keep your consent and the resulting breath or blood test out of evidence.
Okay.
But if you let the officer do their job, which is, hey, you've refused, let them go get a warrant if they want. One, the officer may not go get the warrant for any number of reasons. It's the end of his shift, he doesn't want to, he's not sure if you're intoxicated or not and doesn't want to put the work in. Maybe his police department says we don't get warrants. Okay, so there's that chance. There's also the ability for us to attack the affidavit he puts together for that blood. Okay, so in other words, if he puts together an affidavit and it's really lacking probable cause to get your blood, I, as your attorney, can attack that in court later, as opposed to trying to attack the consent you gave.
Gotcha.
So always refuse, but you're going to do so politely. You're going to let the officer do their job, and if they get a warrant, then they're going to be able to get blood.
Okay. It's important people understand that you always have to be polite. I'm telling you, you have to be polite. It just makes everything go so much better.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Most officers, like in any other profession, they're good people.
Yes, they are.
They're doing a job, and the more polite you are with them, the easier your life is going to be. You don't want to be rude. You have to understand they're coming up to perhaps a dark vehicle in the middle of the night to an unknown situation.
Sure.
If you can put them at ease and be polite and still say, I'd like to refuse or I decline to do your field sobriety test, I'm not going to give a voluntary specimen of breath or blood, that's going to go well for you. And someday a jury who's watching that video is going to appreciate that you had enough sense and your normal abilities to be polite. And all that's going to weigh into whether or not you were intoxicated or whether you were belligerent and not normal.
And this is something. This is a point I want to make too. This is something you and I have talked about. And I think people need to understand this. I think people now, because of what's going on in society, they've made the villain out to be the police officer, which he's not. And I think when they go to roll that window down, the person sitting in that seat or that truck or whatever, or if they're on a bike, whatever, they get stopped. Their first initial contact is most important, and what they need to understand is that police officer is doing his job, and that initial contact has got to be polite and has to be nice.
If I could be on your shoulder when the officer came up and asked you to roll the window down, I would absolutely tell you to be polite, to remember you don't have to answer their questions. I know instinctually, if someone asks us where we're coming from, where we're headed, if we've had anything to drink, because they're in law enforcement, we have a tendency to want to tell the truth.
Sure.
And I would never suggest lying. But remember, you don't have to answer questions, and it's okay to say, I'd rather not answer your questions. More importantly, it is very important, to refuse to do field sobriety tests politely and to refuse to do a voluntary breath or blood test.
Okay, Benson, so people are looking for a good DWI attorney. Tell me how they should, tell them how they find one.
The best way to find a DWI attorney is find a defense attorney from that area, from that jurisdiction, who has a lot of experience trying specifically DWI cases.
Correct.
So for instance, I've tried over 100 DWIs. I started off as a prosecutor in Tarrant County, and I've defended hundreds of DWIs. I understand what the prosecutor is going to be looking at. I understand these tests that the officers do. I know how to spot weaknesses. I know how to take advantage of those weaknesses in court. That's what you want to look for. Another thing that you can look for is someone who is board certified in criminal law. That's a very hard designation to reach. It means you've reached the pinnacle of what a criminal defense attorney can be. And 4 of our attorneys here are board certified in criminal law. They're specialists in criminal law. So look for experience, specifically trial experience, because there are a lot of attorneys that will go into court, but they never try a case.
We've talked about this. Just knowing you a long time, I've talked about this, and that's a bad situation to be in.
Right, because the prosecutor is going to know, hey, this defense attorney is going to roll over, or they don't have a lot of experience. I can tell you with great confidence that I've got more DWI trial experience than any misdemeanor prosecutor in that courthouse, and probably most, if not all, of the felony prosecutors in that courthouse. I've tried a lot of DWIs, and that's what you want. You want someone that can walk in, who knows the judge, who knows the prosecutors, who know what the prosecutors bring to the table, so that they can do a better job. They can outwork the prosecutor.
More proficient job, yes, sir.
Exactly.
Benson, thanks so much for this. I really appreciate it.
Trey, thank you for coming out. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, sir. People, please heed the warnings in this video. Watch it, learn it, and if you need a trial attorney, please call Varghese Somerset. Thank you. See you around. Bye.